In what's been described as a milestone in ties, Chinese President Xi Jinping welcomes the Philippines president to Beijing. Hello, I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington, D.C., and this is The Heat. This week's state visit by the Philippines president marks a new beginning for China-Philippines relations. Chinese President Xi Jinping and Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte agreed their two countries will set aside differences over the South China Sea and work together to improve bilateral ties. The two sides signed 13 agreements covering trade and the economy, infrastructure, the fight against illegal drugs, and maritime cooperation. We begin our coverage with CCTV's Wang in Beijing. And Tongxuan, China and the Philippines have just released a joint statement on President Duterte's visit. Was the dispute over the territorial claims in the South China Sea addressed?
Yes, and the Asian neighbors agreed that negotiation and dialogue is the most effective way to solve the maritime dispute on the South China Sea. And this is one of the major outcomes of Duterte's Beijing visit. Chinese Vice Foreign Minister Liu Zhenming said the friendship between the both countries have now been fully restored, and their cooperation will now enter a new phase. And China and the Philippines would also restore cooperation mechanisms on diplomatic consultations, defense and security consultation, and political party and Congress exchanges. So a new chapter for bilateral ties, really, Anand.
Tongxuan, in an interview with CCTV, President Duterte said only China can help the Philippines. What's the potential for economic and political cooperation between these two countries?
Well, warmer ties between China and the Philippines are definitely encouraging for their economy. The Philippines can expect more Chinese tourists, and this will bring about estimated revenue of $1 billion in 1 year. Also, this is predicted that bilateral trade will reach $60 billion in 5 years and create some 250,000 jobs. Furthermore, Manila has been invited to join China's Maritime Silk Road initiative, so it can benefit from regional economic cooperation. And it's more than just economic benefits. Both countries are now seeing common waters with the South China Sea disputes. They are looking at joint Coast Guard control to safeguard peace and stability in this region. This really gives China a good chance to make good on its argument that Asian diplomacy without intervention of outside parties can be win-win, even for those who have territorial disputes, Anand.
Now, China has supported the efforts of the new Philippine government in its fight against drugs, unlike the United States. What kind of assistance is China offering the Philippines?
That's right. Beijing has promised to support President Duterte's battle against drugs through two ways: financial support and law enforcement cooperation. Duterte said about 4 million Filipinos are embroiled in illegal drug trade. To bring down the numbers, beside the harsh stance against the drug cartels and dealers, the Philippine government plans to build more rehabilitation centers. In November, there will be actually one opening founded by a Chinese businessman. Duterte's office also said China has committed more than $9 billion in low-interest loans to the country, and about 15 million will go towards drug rehabilitation programs. So, Anand.
Thanks, Tongxuan. That's CCTV's Wang Tongxuan reporting from Beijing. Joining us now from Manila is Richard Javad Heydarian. He's an assistant professor of political science at De La Salle University and the author of Asia's New Battlefield, the USA, China, and the Struggle for the Western Pacific. From Beijing, we're joined by young Xiyu. He's a senior fellow at the China Institute of International Studies. And here with us in our Washington, D.C. studio is Michael Kugelman. He's a senior program associate for South and Southeast Asia at the Woodrow Wilson Center. Thanks a lot to all of you for joining us. Richard, here we have two countries that had some major differences only a few months ago. Now we have President Duterte going to Beijing. What's the significance of this visit?
Well, in a very fascinating turn of events, within almost 3 months, the Philippines has gone from one of the fiercest critics of China, from a country that likened China to Nazi Germany on 2 occasions, now to a potential ally, or at least that is what President Duterte has been trying to say during his trip in China. Now, this trip in itself was highly symbolic. Why? Because usually Filipino presidents go to the United States or other major powers before they visit China. But for President Duterte, this is his first major state visit. And in fact, initially it was Japan which was supposed to be the first state visit for him, but he bumped down the Japanese in favor of Beijing, but he will soon be in Japan. Nonetheless, huge economic deals, around $13.5 billion of business deals have been signed, $3 billion of infrastructure investment on the part of China. So he has a lot of economic goodies to bring home and try to portray China as a benevolent power. But the problem here is, what are the concessions he got in the South China Sea? Because while President Duterte said he doesn't want to bring up the issue because he doesn't want to rock the boat, for the Filipino people, that's the most important issue at this point in time. They want China to also show goodwill. They want also some compromise, at least in the Scarborough Shoal.
Xiyu, the Chinese President Xi Jinping has described this visit as a milestone. Let's watch part of what he said. Let's watch.
I hope we can follow the wishes of the people from the standpoint of mutually essential and common interests, and use this visit as an opportunity to push China-Philippines relations back on friendly footing and improve the relationship in all aspects.
So, Xiyu, here we have 2 countries that just had a major diplomatic spat over territorial claims in the South China Sea. So in that respect, how much of a reset is this for both countries?
Well, this visit by Filipino president will open a new chapter by the bilateral relation between China and the Philippines because of 2 reasons. On one hand, the 2 sides have determined to conduct a wide range of comprehensive cooperations. Secondly, the 2 sides agree to manage the difference on South China Sea issue in a proper way, at a proper level. At least both sides agree the disputes or differences on South China Sea is a tail, the bilateral relation as a dog. The dog should strike the tail rather than the tail strike the dog. That was the situation Duterte's predecessor made. So the 2 sides have determined to change the situation into the positive direction.
Michael, the Philippines has been a long-standing ally of the United States. They have very close diplomatic ties, historical ties, as well as military ties as well. President Duterte's visit has been described as a rebalancing of Philippines diplomacy towards China. So what is the significance for U.S. strategic and political interests in the region?
Well, it's absolutely huge, because the Philippines is not just a friend of the United States. It's a critical alliance partner, an ally for so many years, a country that's been in a position to help project U.S. interests across the Asia-Pacific, this being a region where the U.S. has in many ways been very absent. For all this talk about the U.S. rebalancing to Asia, it keeps getting distracted by things in the Middle East and elsewhere. So the Philippines is really key. And what I was struck by was the reaction from the U.S. government, from the spokespersons in the State Department and the White House, where they seemed utterly shocked about what Duterte had said about separation from the U.S. and so forth. You know, you didn't have these U.S. government spokespersons come out there and say, well, we're going to work through this and we still value our relationship. There was just literal shock in which, you know, you essentially heard these spokespersons say, we're going to need to get clarification on this. And I think there's going to be a very key visit this weekend when a top U.S. official, Danny Russell, will be in Manila, and I think that he's going to hope to try to get that clarification then.
Richard, you've written that that by declaring a strong alliance with China, President Duterte is going against the Filipino people's inclination towards the United States. So in that respect, what's motivating this move by the Philippines president?
Well, first of all, we are only talking about statements, not specific policy. We are yet to see whether the Philippine government will really move forward with quote-unquote separating itself with the United States and jumping into the Chinese camp. I really doubt that's going to happen, but that's the statement he has made. Nonetheless, those kinds of statements have not sat well with a lot of Filipinos. You hear a lot of sarcastic comments by Filipinos saying that the Sultan of Sulu has now visited the Ming Dynasty, that this was not like a state visit, it was like a tributary visit. For many Filipinos, they felt the president was too deferential to a very country that is occupying Philippine claimed territories and preventing the Philippines from enjoying sovereign rights within its own exclusive economic zone. So back at home, many people were raising their eyebrows, while in China, I noticed there was a very positive reception of the president. Now, he is going against the grain of public opinion if he really wants to move closer to China at the expense of US. There was a survey that came out just 2 days ago that showed the United States enjoys a positive 66 net approval rating. That means supermajority of Filipinos still like the United States. This is one of the highest rates in the world. China has a negative 33 net approval rating, which means majority of Filipinos have a negative view of China. So he's not actually in sync with the public opinion, and that will put a lot of restrictions on how actually he can move forward with translating his rhetoric of separation into actual policy. Not to mention, his own cabinet members have tried to downplay his statement and to say that this is usual Duterte bravado. There's no guideline or specific instructions yet for us to move forward with an actual separation from the United States.
Right, Richard, he might not be in sync with public opinion as far as this issue is concerned, but he still does enjoy 76% approval rating among the Philippines public.
Yes, he is still in his honeymoon rates, so he's enjoying what I call honeymoon discount rates. He's popular. That is why he's still getting away with this kind of controversial statements, which has raised eyebrows among people. But the Philippine military and the security establishment will watch him very carefully. And for them, their relationship with the United States is extremely important. The U.S. has been a source of full-spectrum assistance to the Philippine military, logistics, finance, training, among other things. So I think President Duterte will carefully consider the reaction of the Philippine political and security establishment when he really wants to translate his statements to actual policy. Nonetheless, I won't be surprised if President Duterte slightly downgrades security relationship with the U.S. by canceling any joint military exercises in the South China Sea and not to give American more access in Subic, Clark, and other major bases facing South China Sea as a form of concessions to China, and in exchange ask the Chinese to give him some concessions in the Scarborough Shoal and other contested areas in the South China Sea. So some slight downgrading in relations with the U.S. is more or less on the horizon, but completely separating from the United States, I think that was more hyperbole than actual policy statement.
Xiyu, as far as the South China Sea issue is concerned, the two sides have issued a joint statement, was issued a short while ago, in which they've now agreed to resolve their differences through negotiation and diplomacy. In fact, the word that was used was consensus. What does that mean?
Well, from Chinese point of view, we understand the new Filipino government has changed to the position for solving this issue, disputes, by negotiation, by bilateral negotiation with China, meanwhile explore the ways for the joint development. That is a positive signal, a positive direction supported by China. Actually, for the long time, China has been calling for direct negotiation among the claimants, rather than the indirect parties like the United States, like Japan, to join in. And meanwhile, China suggests China and ASEAN as a whole to negotiate and set up a COC to guarantee the stability and the peace and the freedom, including the freedom of passage of this region. So by the two-track negotiations, we believe we can achieve the peace and stability and the freedom passages. And this visit by Filipino president paved the way for the positive direction.
Michael, we had the arbitration court, the International Arbitration Court, recently rule in favor of the Philippines against China in this dispute over the South China Sea. The United States had hoped to use that ruling to put pressure on China to comply with it. Has President Duterte now undermined U.S. efforts to do that?
Oh yes, I mean this is one of many reasons why this development is such a big blow for U.S. interests in this region, and particularly in the South China Sea context. But you know, I think it's important to make this point. For all we're talking about the security implications, what this means for territorial disputes and the like, I think that we really need to bring the conversation back to economics. I think that we need to be careful not to get caught up on what this means for the broader security implications of the region, just because I think at the end of the day, what the Philippine president is really concerned about here is economic support. The Philippines clearly needs a lot of such support, particularly for infrastructure. And I think the fact that you know, there is so much money coming out of this, so many claims of investments from the Chinese, is a pretty big deal. China is simply willing to put more investments out there than the U.S. is, for example. And I think that the Philippine president, I mean, he has a good reason. I think he's very practical in a sense. For all we talk about his bombastic rhetoric, he's very practical, and he understands the need to find the best possible economic partner to address these economic interests.
So in that respect, Michael, do you agree with Richard there that as far as security relations are concerned, there will only be a slight downgrading in the relationship with the United States?
I really think so, and particularly in the short term. For one thing, bureaucratically, it would just take a very long time to end these various defense agreements that the two countries have with each other. It may take a few years, and by then you may have a different leader and so forth. But absolutely, I think the economics is the big thing, and the actual changes for security could be relatively limited, just because I don't think the Philippines or the Philippine leadership really wants to end its security partnership with the United States. It simply wouldn't make sense.
Okay, we're going to have to take a break right now. More of our discussion on China-Philippine relations right after that. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat.